Hello and welcome to the MRO show presented by Chadwell Supply. I'm your host, Adam Porter. Chadwell Supply is 100% dedicated to the multifamily community. Your order is on our truck, delivered the next day. Today on the MRO show, we're going to be talking HVAC, specifically A2L tools. So I'm glad to welcome back to the show Matt Trotter, my favorite HVAC expert. Matt, how you doing?
Am I your only HVAC expert? Or
there are a few people I call, but I always call you first.
Oh, see, now that warms my heart. Thank you, Adam. I'm doing pretty well. It's actually been a pretty decent year.
I got to tell you, it's 100% true too. Anytime I have a question, you should know. You're getting texts and calls from me on the daily.
You call plenty. That's for sure.
Right. So I know that you've been really busy because we talk frequently. You guys have been doing live A2L webinars
Every month.
You've been doing in-person training on A2L refrigerants.
Yep.
And you later on today, the day we're recording this, you're going to be doing a live stream for social. So you're going to be doing a few of those as well.
A live Q&A. So I'm talking about our brothers' equipment, A2Ls, and just reach out, call in, or we'll be answering questions live.
I know one of the big questions, because I take a look at the chats as you're going and you're doing these lives a lot. One of the big questions you're getting is, if I'm a maintenance technician out there turning wrenches on HVAC units, and I see this transition happening, am I going to have to replace all my tools, or am I good to go with what I have in my pack out right now?
No, absolutely. That is one of the biggest things. So we see the refrigerant transition. We know when new equipment's coming. What does it look like? All those things. How's it size? All those questions come up. But one of the biggest things is, how do I do my job? What do I need to do my job? And will I be able to do it safely? So tools is one of the biggest questions I get.
Is there any kind of umbrella question, like the big question that techs need to answer when it comes to A2L rated tools?
Is there a big question? Yes. The big question is, are your tools non-arcing, non-sparking? And what tools actually are introduced or break into the refrigeration side of things? Those are the things you have to think about.
So give me an example of a few tools that I can keep, things I know I definitely am not going to have to replace.
Well, first off, you don't have to replace everything. All right. So what you have, for 80% of it, is probably very successful, and you'll be safe operating with A2L refrigerants because it still installs the same as 410A. It's a very safe refrigerant in that regard. What we have to worry about is when we're transitioning the refrigerant in and out of the system, or we're charging the system, or we're recovering, or we're pulling a vacuum. So the tools that we can keep, that we can use, all your hand tools, absolutely. Your meters for sure. You can use even your drills, any of those, because most of those are double insulated and non-arcing, non-sparking already. So you don't have to worry about that. A lot of your, any wrenches, cutting tools, your brazing equipment, all that's still fine. So none of that needs to change.
I love it. The longer that list gets, the less money I'm spending, Matt. So I appreciate you about that for sure. So let's take a look then, now that we have a baseline for what we don't have to change, let's take a look at what we are going to have to change. Let's walk through some common HVAC tools, item by item, and let's talk about what we have to face and can we keep them or not?
All right. Well, how about this? How about we start with me asking you a question?
Okay, shoot.
Right. What is it that we use to access the system, to hook up and read the refrigerant pressures?
Read the refrigerant pressures. So everything I need to know, I'm going to get from my manifolds to my gauges.
Your manifold gauges, absolutely right. Now, The manifold gauges, it's actually broken up into two parts. Mm-hmm. You want to go for the bonus round and see if you can answer that? Which two parts make up that manifold gauge set?
You're going to have to help me. I need to phone a friend, Matt. Talk to me.
All right. So you have the actual manifold itself.
Right.
That's literally the analog or digital gauge that's sitting on top, and it has the handles and the valves and everything else. Right. Then the second part are the hoses. It seems really rudimentary, like, well, of course, Matt, it comes as a set, but we have to break those apart because some we change, some we don't.
Gotcha.
Now, do you have to change the actual manifold, the gauge part itself? No, you actually don't have to change that out.
Why
but
is that?
I encourage people to change it out.
Okay.
So when we transition refrigerants from R22 to 410A, we all got new gauges because of the higher pressures.
Sure.
We actually didn't need to do that because the hoses that we had before could handle them, but we wanted a new gauge so that we would know which refrigerant we were working with.
Okay.
See, I come out of a refrigeration background way back in the day, and I used to have 12 gauges on my truck all the time.
Different gauges for different refrigerants.
Different gauges for different refrigerants. But I knew that when I held that gauge in my hand, I knew what refrigerant I was working with.
Gotcha.
So with this new transition, let's say we're going from 410A and we're going to be working with R32. I want to have a different manifold set, a different gauge set, so that when I look at it, I know it's different and I'm not thinking 410A because the pressures are very close. So that's a good idea to change out that manifold set.
So it's just kind of a mental check to make sure you're giving yourself that extra step to make sure you know what you're working with.
Absolutely. And it's a real thing. Like, because if I'm thinking 410A pressure, but I'm actually working with R32, which is about 3 pounds more, then I might be off a little bit. Or if I'm working with 454B and I'm 15 pounds off, well, I'm going to overcharge or undercharge the system. So having that little check is really, really important for a technician.
Gotcha.
The other thing is the hoses.
Okay.
You have to change the hoses. You don't want to have a hose that's not rated for A2Ls.
I see.
Now, they look exactly like 410A hoses or A1 hoses, but they have to be rated for that, not really that pressure, but for the chemical breakup of the refrigerant itself.
I gotcha. So definitely change the hoses. You recommend changing the gauges.
I recommend changing the gauges. Now, if you have digital gauges, keep them.
Okay.
If you have, your S-man gauges, if you have a digital gauge set, just get the update and make sure you have that refrigerant that's downloaded inside that. And it's really easy to do. Just go online, download it, and then hook it up to just take a thumb drive, plug it into the actual manifold set, and it automatically pulls it in.
Digitally get that update. Analog, you recommend changing them out.
I recommend changing it out if it's analog.
Gotcha. So that's gauges and hoses.
Gauges and hoses.
Very good. All right, let's move on. Let's take a look at one of the other tools that you're going to be using on a regular basis, vacuum pumps. Matt, what are some of the important aspects of a vacuum pump that I need to be looking for if I'm going to be hooking into an A2L unit?
All right, when you're talking about a vacuum pump, when you're using a vacuum pump, just a little bit of history for everybody, you're going to use the vacuum pump to remove non-condensables, air, and to help boil off some refrigerant out of the oil. So refrigerant does pass through a vacuum pump. UL requires us to be non-arcing, non-sparking for that vacuum pump. So that is the biggest thing you have to look for. Now, I can tell you that this year, there is not one vacuum pump in the United States that is non-arcing, non-sparking because they're all overseas. We've brought them in especially. We have them now. It'd be a rolling change, and you can use that vacuum pump on any other system, but you have to make sure you use it on the A2L systems for sure.
So let me underscore what you just said there. If you get one of the new non-arcing, non-sparking vacuum pumps, they are backwards compatible with your other units.
Correct.
Right. So if you're out there, and we know this is almost everybody, let's just go ahead and say everybody in multifamily out there is going to be working with a lot of different kinds of systems on their property.
Yes, about everybody's going to have at least 2 or 3 different refrigerants, different systems on their property for sure. And having that one pump you can use on all of them really takes away the headaches.
So it's a required investment if you're working on A2Ls, but it's an important investment and you're going to get your money's worth out of it.
100%.
Cool. So we talked about gauges, talked about hoses, talked about vacuum pumps. Let's look at recovery machines.
Well, that's the one thing that actually does process and move the refrigerant through the machine itself. So it's kind of a big one.
Yeah.
You actually, all our listeners out there, you might have a recovery machine that can work with an A2L right now. But you'd have to go read the side plate nameplates that would tell you if it is or if it isn't. What you're looking for is the side plate would say it works with R32, R454B, or 1234YF, which is an HFO. If your machine says it on the side, you're good to go. That will work with A2Ls. It's already safety compliant and ready to go.
So we said if it says A2L certified on there, you know.
Yep.
If it says it'll work with R32 or R454B, you know. And then what's that third refrigerant you mentioned?
The third one is 1234YF. It's a new refrigerant. It came into the United States about 4 or 5 years ago. It's used in automotive. It's an HFO, and it actually makes up a portion of R454B.
Gotcha. So if you look at your equipment and it says it's on there, you should be good to go.
Funny enough, we actually sell an Infocon recovery machine that actually works with HFOs and 1234YF, and we had no idea.
No idea. But it's good to go. So that'd be one less thing. If you can check it and you already have it, one less thing to buy.
If not, you have to get one. It is required.
Yeah, because as you said, the refrigerant's going through that machine. You got to do it. You got to be safe.
And with that, what are you putting the refrigerant into when you're recovering?
Yeah, you have to have the right recovery tank.
Right, and they're special tanks.
So tell me how I tell the difference between the kind of recovery tanks I'm using now and the new A2L recovery tanks.
Well, we all know our recovery tanks. They're yellow and gray, and they're controlled by the Department of Transportation, DOT.
Okay.
And they are made for holding and containing refrigerants. The new ones are going to be special, also regulated by the DOT, but they're going to have a red stripe on top or a complete red top, of some sort, and they're going to be counter thread.
Okay.
Now, A2Ls are mildly flammable refrigerants. That means that the tanks have to be counter thread, just like your acetylene tank.
Sure.
They're counter thread.
Right.
The equipment does not have to be counter thread. So when you're thinking counter thread, it only applies to the tanks.
Hooking up to
There's
the
a lot of
tanks.
confusion about this.
Yeah, that's an important aspect to talk about. So it only applies to the tanks, not to the equipment.
Now, an A2L recovery cylinder can only accept A2L refrigerants. You can't put an A1, you can't put 410A in, you can't put MO99, you can't put any drop-ins in those tanks. It has to just be A2Ls. And you can't put an A2L refrigerant in a normal tank because it's mildly flammable. So that's documentation is going to be really key. And keeping that organized is a big deal.
And making sure like you have those reverse threads on there. And if you need an adapter, you can get reverse thread adapters. Here we have those as well.
Yes, you can. Actually, they come with the UniWeld A2L manifold sets.
Nice.
So it actually sells it with it, which is kind of nice.
Absolutely.
I would encourage also getting a hose that's counter thread, mostly because the adapter is nice, but the adapter goes on lefty tighty, righty loosey, and then your hose goes on righty tighty, lefty loosey. So you kind of got to figure that out.
Doing a little bit of jiggling is
a little
what you're
bit,
saying.
yeah.
So in talking about safety and some of these safety features that we have, like the counter thread, to make sure that you're going and using the right equipment, let's talk about another piece of equipment that's outstanding for safety: leak detection. Why is leak detectors important when it comes to A2L equipment and refrigerant?
Well, the number one thing that we want to definitely not have is leaks when it comes to a mildly flammable refrigerant. Our biggest concern is confined spaces with a lot of refrigerant being grouped together. Those could be ignition events. So we want to make sure we have lots of ventilation, lots of air, lots of oxygen, and that's what keeps it safe. So leaks are a very big deal. But leak detectors, they do come in many shapes and sizes, but a lot of them have a little heater or a little sparker in the end because it breaks down the refrigerant. Then it looks for key things. It looks for fluorine, it looks for hydrogen, it looks for carbon. It breaks it down, then seeks out that specific chemical. Well, you don't want to do that with a mildly flammable. You want to have basically a lighter on the end trying to break it apart. So you need to have an A2L compatible leak detector, which we actually sold one of those. I don't know if you know that, but the Infocon one that we have, it's the yellow one. It's actually rated for A2Ls already, and it'll work with that refrigerant and be backwards compatible with the other refrigerants.
Outstanding. So we know where our leak detection is taken care of. And I also know you're a guy that once there is a leak, if you want to know where you know where
Dial it in.
Dial it in.
Nitrogen and soap bubbles.
That I know. I had to get that in there for you, Matt.
I'll say that till the day I die.
So we talked about tools. We talked a little bit about tanks, but I do want to circle back around and kind of stick the landing on that a little bit. These new tanks that are coming in, obviously, looking back in time, we know our refrigerant have come in different colors. Now, that's a quiz you've given me before.
Yeah.
Let's see how well I do now if I remember them. Now, I do remember R22
Is
green.
It's green.
It's green, that lovely mint green color.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then we transitioned to R410A when R410A was going to save the world. Save the world and the ozone layer. It actually worked pretty good.
Actually did a decent job.
Yeah. And that was the Pepto Pink machine.
Oh, it's a beautiful pink.
Yeah, it really is just a gorgeous tank sitting there on your shelf, bright pink, loving it. We're not going to go with a single color tank for A2Ls. So share again what an A2L refrigerant tank is going to look like.
Absolutely. So the fresh refrigerant we're talking here, we're not talking
Yes.
recovery. We're talking the fresh refrigerant. You're going to Chadwell. You say, hey, give me a tank of this. Now, before I get to the color scheme, I want to talk about weights for just a second.
Okay.
R22, you used to buy a tank was 30 pounds.
Okay.
So you got 30 pounds of R22 in that. 410A came around. The tank got thicker. We got less refrigerant and the density is greater. So we have 25 pounds that come in 410A tanks. The new refrigerants, R454B and R32, will be in 20-pound tanks.
20-pound tanks.
So when you buy it, it's a 20-pounder.
Gotcha.
Also, that tank will be reverse thread, just like we talked about.
Right.
So having an adapter is key to work with that. Do not cross those threads. You just wasted 20 pounds of gas that you can't get out of the tank now. So it's very important to remember that.
Yeah. Careful. Do it right. Do it once.
Exactly. Also, on R410A and R22 tanks or drop-ins, we've got rupture discs. So if it ever gets above 125 degrees internal to the tank, it pops off and you lose all the gas. The new tanks are going to have relief valves, not rupture discs. So if it gets too hot, it'll relieve a little bit, then it'll close off.
Gotcha.
So that's also something new that's on the tank itself.
Another safety feature.
Another safety feature. And last but not least, the colors. Light green or gray with a red top or red stripe and just the labeling on the side.
Gotcha.
They're all going to look uniform. They're all going to look the same. So I don't love this, Adam. I'll just be honest. That's my opinion. I like the colors. I like knowing what tank I'm working with by the color I'm working with.
See it from across the room.
If I have those two refrigerants on my site, I have to think of which one I'm grabbing. Yeah. I have to pay very close attention. So documentation, labeling, making it well known, using some sort of a bright sticker so that you know this is R32, this is 454B. That's the direction we're heading, and that's what we're going to be looking for.
And we are going to be carrying those stickers. If you are R32, R454B, get a box of those stickers. Make sure you put it on there because, again, we want to be able to see what we're working with from across the room.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. So, Matt, wrap this up for us. When we talk about A2L tools, what are we thinking? Big picture question.
Big picture question for A2L tools. The biggest picture question that, if that's even good English, would be, what do I need to do my job successfully? You're looking at recovery machine, vacuum pump, manifold set, and hoses automatically. What do I need to do a decent leak check? If I'm in electronic leak detection, you need to have that ready for A2Ls as well. The key here is safety. It's handling the gas well. It's using a lot of nitrogen to sweep the gas afterwards once it's gone. And it's keeping the tanks 25 feet away from any hot work and paying attention to being detailed and organized.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I really appreciate your insight. I really always do learn something. Thank you for breaking it down for us and helping us be more comfortable and more prepared to work through this A2L refrigerant transition.
Absolutely, Adam. Happy to be here.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the MRO Show presented by Chadwell Supply. If you appreciated the information you heard today and you found it useful, please rate us 5 stars on your favorite podcast service. And for more MRO Show, check out chadwellsupply.com/podcast.